I've played a lot of Zelda over the years. Like, a lot. I really love this series, so it doesn't feel good to say that I was disappointed by Tears of the Kingdom. I wouldn't call it bad. It's really pretty, and it's really impressive what they were able to achieve on the Switch console. And despite coming away with some sour opinions on it, it ended up being my most played title, which I find fascinating. If I didn't like it, why did I play it for so long? I think it's important to start this discussion with Breath of the Wild. That game was very important to the franchise. The more recent titles were plagued by worse and worse pacing issues and a stagnating formula, so a fresh take on Zelda was exactly what the series needed. It's amazing how you can already be off exploring the world before I even finish talking, and you can pretty much go straight to Ganon if you want. Hyrule is so much bigger and freer than it has ever been, and it's impossible to understate just what this game did to further the open world genre. Personally, I thought Breath of the Wild was fine. I tend to prefer a more catered experience, so an open world was never going to be my favorite. But even I could see what makes this game so special. There really wasn't anything like it at the time, and everything from the runes to the paraglider were so fun to use that the game definitely earned its 10 out of 10s. I would have never called it perfect though. The dungeons and the shrines left a lot to be desired, especially for returning fans of the series. I didn't even finish all the shrines after finding one too many low quality tests of strength, which never sat right with me. I respect that they managed to fill the vast map of Hyrule, but I feel that it was just too much, and resources were spread way too thin. What made Tears of the Kingdom so exciting for me was the chance to fix these issues and more. The trailers were all exceptional at generating hype. We're finally getting more information about the Zonai. The Sky and Demise are being given a second chance. And a return to traditional dungeons? It was all so exciting. In retrospect, Tears was never going to reach the astronomical expectations of all my hopes and dreams, but I'm not sure if it met my minimum expectations either. The game starts off with a decently long walk and talk section, the bane of many gamers. That's a bit of an odd choice coming off the heels of Breath of the Wild, but Tears clearly wants to try far more for its story this time around. One of the biggest criticisms of the previous game was its story and how much of it happened in the past, so I didn't mind sitting through a few longer cutscenes fleshing out the present. I'm not sure if Ganondorf full-on shattering the Blade of Evil's Bane makes much sense, but it does allow for a really cool set piece, so I'll allow it. I'm just glad to see Link and Zelda and Ganondorf all having an active role in the story again. Until Tears falls back on Breath of the Wild. These half commitments to new ideas are going to be seen all throughout the game. Tears presents a much grander story, but it also wants to be skippable like Breath of the Wild, but only some parts. After this cutscene, Zelda gets yanked out of the plot for the rest of the game again, and Ganondorf kind of just fucks off, which you wouldn't expect for how much he's built up here. He'll astral project a few Zeldas all around, but none of that is even all that relevant to the player. The Rito mention a horrible blizzard causing them to starve, but you navigate it just fine. The Zora and Goron tribes are clearly negatively affected by the curses on their territories, but both issues feel so far removed from Ganondorf's power that they almost feel coincidental. The Goron found a new ore at one of their established mining facilities that comes with addictive drawbacks. I honestly thought Ganondorf wasn't involved at first. The Gerudo is easily the best area in this sense. This place takes advantage of being a sequel in that you return to Gerudo Town for the first time and it's abandoned. The Gibdo have taken over and forced the Gerudo underground, which is far more befitting of an evil magical tyrant than crack or pollution. The fact that we see Gerudo physically retreated to safe houses underground really shows the fear and overall effect Ganondorf has had on their land. And the sandstorms break your navigation and limit your visibility? Why couldn't the Rito have something like this? Overall, Ganondorf's presence in the game feels more like it's built up in the very first few minutes, and then I spend half the game forgetting that he's even supposed to be a threat. To be fair, games like Wind Waker kind of do the same thing, but when this Ganondorf wants to constantly gloat about how cool and powerful and sexy he is, I think it's a little weird for this version to stay in his little hole underground and send fake projections. I get he's building power or whatever, but it's still lame for someone who could break the Master Sword day one. I'll save the rest of the story discussion for when it becomes relevant again, because the memories in Zelda are a whole other can of worms. After failing to catch your princess, you wake up on the Great Sky Island, which acts as a bite-sized piece of the game world where you come to grips with the game's mechanics. This works pretty much exactly like the Great Plateau from the last game, but a bit more linear this time around. You can still collect Ascend before Fuse, but you'll be met with a bit more resistance if you think to backtrack to the snow area first and circle around that way. Still, I appreciate how the game gives you options to make both ways possible. As for the tutorial shrines themselves, they all do a fantastic job showing off the basics of what each power can do. I feel like when people say that Tears makes Breath feel like a tech demo in comparison, it's these powers that do much of the heavy lifting. Breath of the Wild's powers are fairly simple physics manipulations, with small push, big push, no push, and the boring one. These runes fit right at home in that original game, but are blown out of the water by the Zonai powers of the future. Or past? I don't know. Otrian is obviously the crowning achievement. Being almost a straight upgrade of Magnesis, you can now pick up pretty much everything and attach objects together. It's honestly remarkable how well the system works. Everything just does what I expect, and though it can be a little clunky to build stuff, the act of building is extremely intuitive and doesn't sacrifice immersion at all. People have made some amazing things with this tool, which goes to show how much depth there really is if you want to play around with it. So let's talk about why I didn't really vibe with this mechanic. The main issue I have isn't anything to do with the power itself, but the systems surrounding it. The use of Zonai parts is clearly designed with the same principles in mind as the weapon system, where the player is expected to pick up whatever junk they can and constantly pivot to the next thing as those resources get used up. The gachapon machines for obtaining these parts are actually really well done to incentivize creativity in the system, as it makes it much more likely that you run into a situation where you don't have the parts you typically use to solve a problem. This means that you have to pivot to use the random other parts that came with your purchases, forcing ingenuity while still feeling natural. The problem with applying the system to parts is that it doesn't account for the amount of parts the player uses. Though the price to pay isn't very big, the player is still punished for every extra part that they use, and it adds up over the entire playthrough. Thus, the player is never incentivized to be creative with more than the minimum amount of parts to do a job. The result of this is most players using less parts to make the vehicles cheaper to build, which always leads to the same boring design such as the fan bike. You can always use auto build to substitute parts for Zonite in place of a trip to a gacha machine, but that's just another resource that you have to grind for, and you can't use Zonite parts in any new designs. That's not even to mention the asinine decision to make certain parts dissolve after a certain amount of use. The other big issue surrounding Ultra Hand systems is that the game never challenges you to build anything beyond the simplest stuff. It would be one thing if the fan bike was just the cheapest vehicle, but practically every issue can be solved by it. Getting somewhere quick, crossing a gap, gaining height, and carrying a crystal can all be done by the fan bike. It even bypasses terrain like sand or water, so there's almost never a reason to get creative and use anything else. Even the rare challenges where the ceiling is too low or you have to carry more than a crystal are just 4 wheels on a platform away from being complete. I hate to say it, but Nuts and Bolts did it better. Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts is not a good Banjo-Kazooie game, but its vehicle building is genuinely really deep and well thought out. You start out with really shit materials to do all of your objectives, but progression and exploration drip feeds you new parts that can all potentially be used to make your machine more efficient in various key areas. This is just the incentive that I needed to keep going back to the garage and expanding on my design. And notably, I couldn't just use one design for the entire game. Missions constantly expect more and more from you and often need vehicles tailored specifically for them, so no matter what, I had to engage with all of the game's mechanics the entire time. Personally, I feel like a better system for tiers would have been to gather permanent parts that you can use at any time, similar to Nuts and Bolts. New parts could even be unlocked in chests or side quests, which would be a huge improvement from much of the trash these tend to give you. And then I wouldn't have to worry about wasting additional materials while crafting new solutions. They already have the battery system as a limiter and to give Zonite purpose, so it's not like this would radically change the vision the devs had for this game. And of course, more varied missions that really push the game's systems and my creativity to the limit would be great. The remaining powers aren't nearly as complex. Fuse is the Zelda team's response to criticism on Breath of the Wild's weapons. It can be a bit clunky, needing to drop items on the ground first instead of fusing materials onto your weapon within a menu. You could also fuse materials that you get right away, but that's not always convenient either. I don't really agree that this fixes the issue of weapon durability. One-of-a-kind special weapons still break really quickly without a convenient way to repair. But at least fighting enemies and bosses rewards you with increasingly powerful fuse materials this time. If anything, I feel like this is a much better response to the plethora of materials that you didn't really do anything with in the last game, and it adds another layer of experimentation to the rather stale 3 weapon types. Though I think this is an improvement on melee weapons, it's a bit hit or miss with shields. The main things you'll be fusing to your shields are Zonai devices, except these don't just drain battery, but durability. It's not a small amount either, with shields barely lasting a minute of use. This makes the only useful shields either benign materials or single-use devices. It's never worth wasting so much durability on a shield when melee weapons can do the job far better, so I only ever use traversal fusions. The rocket shield is clearly the best one, but the spring and bomb shield are useful substitutes, and it was fun to have a skateboard or wing shield. I was disappointed when fusing a wheel to my shield didn't work. Why'd you think that's how I wanted it oriented? The arrow fuse menu has already been talked to death about how bad it is. It just feels unpolished. If you haven't already used a specific item before in this playthrough, you'll probably be scrolling for a while trying to find it. I've heard it was made this way to incentivize seeing something new that you might want to use along the way, and that's also why there isn't a way to mark as favorite, but I don't think this had the intended effect. I don't want to scroll, so fire fruits and bombs it is, I guess. Ascend stands out as extremely basic compared to the other powers, but that doesn't discount its usefulness. Tears places far more emphasis on verticality, so Ascend is extremely useful for getting height near outcropped walls and ceilings. It also provides a very convenient way of exiting the many caves that have been placed around Hyrule. I'm happy to say that this mechanic surprised me with how much I ended up using it. Rewind is probably the most broken power Link has ever been given, especially when working in tandem with Ultra Hand. If I had to guess, Rewind was likely a response to the developers losing their vehicles over the side of cliffs. This is by far when Rewind is at its best, saving the car you just spent so much time making from being abandoned. Far less interesting is how Rewind can break much of the game in half. If you ever need height, it's always an Ultra Hand lift Rewind away, which is just kinda lame. I get that the point is to be able to solve puzzles in your own way, even through breaking them, but when so many of the puzzles can be solved the exact same way, it quickly loses its luster. With the tutorial out of the way, we can finally descend and explore Hyrule. The paraglider is locked behind a fairly tedious quest with a lot of walking. Breath definitely did it better, but I guess it's easy enough to finish. Speaking of that game, let's discuss the reuse of the world map. As someone who's already spent so much time in Breath of the Wild, it's hard not to feel like this is just playing the same game again. They polished areas and added caves and new shrines, but the broad strokes are all the same. Breath of the Wild's map was always really good, I just expected more to be done to change things up. The most notable change is the complete lack of Sheikah tech, but I would argue that this is to the game's detriment. Tears of the Kingdom wants to be a sequel to Breath of the Wild while trying so desperately to hide its roots in fear of being overshadowed. I believe the Calamity is brought up once or twice in the entire game, while every shrine, guardian, or divine beast is just gone without so much as a passing line of dialogue for an explanation. And it's baffling that they thought people wouldn't notice? Or care? These are giant titans. Who wrote the Shrine of Resurrection that single-handedly changed Link's fate? It all just disappeared when its purpose was done? What about the lore you specifically wrote when the technology was used to seal Ganon 1000 years ago? Was that not their purpose being done? And if it was only meant to be with the destruction of Ganon, he seems just fine right here. Tears often goes out of its way to deny Breath ever even existed, which feels so frustrating as the advertised sequel to the acclaimed title. It's not the Sheikah Slate, it's the Pua Pad, dummy. Melis? Don't you mean Gloom? Why are the NPCs that do and don't remember Link so inconsistent? It just feels like the game is constantly trying to gaslight me for having played Breath of the Wild. It starts to feel like the devs didn't care about this game being a sequel. I understand that the lore and continuity wasn't Tears' primary goal, but it's frustrating how the game always seems to take the easiest way out. It's so much easier to not acknowledge something than to haphazardly try to explain it. Never mind actually try to work it in and make sense. They tried replacing Guardians with Gloom Hands, but it's just not the same. Guardians were introduced early while the player is weak and vulnerable, and the fact that they have a powerful ranged attack means that you're in trouble for as long as they can see you. Gloom Hands, by contrast, get blocked by a simple wall, and they feel confined to a single area. And if you do manage to defeat them, the fight gets dragged out with a Phantom Ganon fight for some reason, which I assume is also why the enemy couldn't be introduced early. By the time you run into one, they are nowhere near the same threat level as the Guardians we saw in Breath of the Wild. They just lose that fear factor as soon as you fight one, and they don't have the same risk-reward system of parrying. With all of that gone, they're honestly just kind of annoying. Back to discussing the world design, fortunately, the mainland of Hyrule isn't the only layer to explore this time around. The sky was featured prominently in all of the advertising, and for good reason. It's really pretty and had a lot of potential. Unfortunately, they pulled a Skyward Sword again. The Great Sky Island is really good, that's basically all the sky has to offer. Basically the entire sky is empty, with a few copy and paste structures strewn around. You can count the number of substantive areas on one hand, and the total space the islands actually take up likely wouldn't even fill an entire region. It can be kind of fun to just fly around up here, but the sky itself barely justifies having a map layer at all. At least the depths fills the entire space of the map, though this probably wasn't a good thing. Where the sky had nothing to explore, the depths has way too much, and so much of it feels the exact same. Jumping into the depths for the first time is incredible. You're jumping into a completely new territory, and it's dark, and it's scary, and it's leaving an amazing first impression. This was such a good idea, but it was spread so thin to fill the entire world space that it's hard to continue to appreciate it after a while. It feels good to hit up light routes and permanently leave your mark where you've been, but the light also reveals how the entire layer consists of two biomes, cave and lava cave. I really want to love the depths. I think the gloom playing a much bigger role with the enemies and the overall danger level here is fantastic. Putting together that the light routes each correspond with an overworld shrine feels great to discover on your own. The encounters with Master Koga really stand out and are fantastic changes of pace. Everything else just overstays its welcome, which just isn't great for a game about exploring. It's not very appealing to look at after a while, and the core gameplay loop doesn't last nearly the entire underworld map. Breath of the Wild was already huge, so I don't believe that more than doubling it with the depths and sky was a good idea. Speaking of spread thin, the shrines. One thing I didn't expect with this sequel wasn't just the return of shrines, but the return with more shrines. Once again, Tears doubles down on one of the weaker aspects of Breath, and though I feel like many of these are a solid improvement over its predecessors, I definitely cannot say all of them. Like with Breath of the Wild, you can very much see how ideas were stretched just to fill parts of the expansive map. One of my favorite parts about older Zelda games was getting lost or stuck on a puzzle, and then eventually having things click and getting that aha moment. Of the 152 shrines, Tears of the Kingdom gave me that moment a total of 1 time, and I remember it specifically because of that. Gyokoum Shrine, aka Built for Rails, had me stuck on its second half for much longer than any other puzzle in the game. Upon loading the shrine, I was given the tooltip about how Link can shield surf across rails, and so I skipped the first and second puzzle doing just that. I couldn't shield surf the last set of rails, nor could I easily Ultra Hand rewind a platform to the end. I had to sit there and really think about how I could get from A to B without the platforms falling off, and I loved that, easily my favorite shrine. There are some other really good shrines out there. The horrendous tests of strength have all been replaced with curated combat trials reminiscent of the standout Eventide Island. Ultra Hand also lends itself to a much better variety than the previous powers, making many shrines far more unique and interesting. But 152 is a big number, and duds are bound to happen. I can understand splitting tutorial shrines up to teach certain mechanics, but the likelihood of encountering one of these 20 plus hours in is way too high. They would still suck if they were all found towards the beginning area, but they feel like clear filler when they're easily missable all the way into the late game. And why are they all so slow? I thought the whole point of the open format was to avoid doing this. There's also far too many crystal escort missions. The challenge for these rarely changes much beyond set dressing, making Raru's blessings feel exceptionally dull. In fact, look at shrines like Gahatanaum, which is a free Raru's blessing on the path to the Wind Temple. It didn't really do anything to earn a blessing besides follow the main quest. Is it weird that I prefer a puzzle as a reward than a blessing? I wholly believe in the idea of quality over quantity, which is why I found the increase in shrines so baffling. They clearly couldn't handle the workload last time, so why did they exacerbate the issue? When I reflect on Tears' shrines, I remember a few decent puzzles and a lot of tedious flying. Most of their shrines are far too easy or simple to leave an impression. By the mid-game, I'm just doing them to mark off a checklist as opposed to expecting fun. It should be noted that this is probably the most overpowered Link we've ever had, and I think that's the point. You have the power to do things however you like, which is important to that sense of freedom. But when you can do anything, it's really hard to create a satisfying puzzle. Tears' puzzles are like a gate with no fence. I can spend the time trying to unlock it, but the best solution is to obviously just walk around it, and it gets extremely boring when so many puzzles can be solved this way. I've mentioned the Rewind Ultra Hand tech previously, and this is where it's most applicable. And despite not being able to take out your own Zonai devices in shrines, there's nothing stopping you from bringing in a pre-fused rocket shield. And yeah, you ultimately get to decide if you want to use these boring methods, but I remember a shrine with a block on a rail and a bunch of raised walls. I needed to get a sphere up to the top, so I ultra-handed the block to the top and used Rewind to return the sphere to my level. I thought this was a really lame puzzle until a year later when I saw somebody solve this puzzle using a paddle, which was clearly the intended solution. Because I had so much freedom, I didn't even know I was breaking the puzzle in half. It's literally Link's basic moveset, so when I was left unsatisfied, I blamed the puzzle for being lame, not how I solved it. Similarly, in the Wind Temple, I didn't realize you could shoot down icicles to spin this gear, so I attempted it by attaching spears to the gears until the door opened for just long enough to get in there. I knew I did the puzzle wrong, but the puzzle was solved, so I moved on. When my first idea always works, I never get that aha moment that is the foundation of a puzzle game. I don't get that satisfaction of overcoming a problem when I can just plow through the obstacles without thinking. While I'm on the topic of dungeons, I might as well get them out of the way. One of the other big selling points was how classic dungeons are back, and that simply isn't true. In terms of design, these dungeons still most closely resemble Breath of the Wild's, with 4 or 5 individual challenges that can be done in any order. It makes sense for a game with such an emphasis on freedom and forging your own path to do this, but as hard as the developers tried, I don't know if you can design a good Zelda dungeon like this. The idea of dungeons all the way back in the first game was to slowly map it out, and then make your way to both the dungeon item and main boss. Even if you find the dungeon map, you still have to find the dungeon keys and work out how to get to everything you need. I feel like the point was to feel a little overwhelmed on where to go, and you have to discover the path for yourself. In Tears, you're not only given a map instantly on arrival, but with marks for every objective. Additionally, every path is isolated and extremely short, making it impossible to get lost for even a second. There's also no sense of progression. There's no locked doors or paths that you have to unlock, nor do you get a new dungeon item for your arsenal. To be fair, Breath and Tears specifically gave its entire toolset in the beginning of the game to facilitate being able to do things in any order. But doing this loses part of what made delving into dungeons so thrilling. In older titles, you never know what you're going to find, but you do know that it will increase what you can do in the world. And importantly, challenges can be built upon each other, steadily introducing more and more complex ideas. The open world format can't do that, meaning every single puzzle has to be as basic as can be, and not a single idea can ever be properly fleshed out. I appreciate that every dungeon got a unique theme this time around, and I agree that these generally are an improvement on Divine Beast, but as far as dungeons go, these are still at the bottom of the tier list. The Wind Temple is likely the temple that most players will go to first. I would be remiss to omit the lead up to the temple. Jumping up these flying ships as you ascend to the top of a swirling tornado was really cool. In fact, all of the lead ups to the dungeons are far and away the best parts of each one. As for the dungeon itself, the puzzles on display here are fairly one note and far too simple. The only ones I remember are the one that I messed up and the one that you have to fly under the ship for. The ship looks really neat, but a lot of the details like the puzzles are really forgettable. Colgera at least has a lot of spectacle, and it feels really satisfying to dive straight through their body. It's a solid enough boss fight to potentially start the game off with. The Fire Temple has one of the more complex designs in the game. It's pretty alright if you choose to interact with the minecart systems that are laid in front of you, but this is also the easiest one to ignore all of its mechanics and skip from objective to objective. Making ramps to launch Yunobo is the only thing the dungeon has left if you choose to skip all the rails, and Marbled Goma will go down as one of the easiest bosses the series has ever had. The Water Temple is my least favorite dungeon in the entire series. Like with the Wind Temple, the lead up is pretty cool, but I don't think you can get much farther from the feeling of getting lost in dungeons in this temple. Everything is clearly laid out for you in open platforms, and not a single puzzle has any cohesion with each other. Of every dungeon and puzzle I've completed in any game in the series, I've never had my suspension of disbelief shattered until I saw the switch with the rotating cover. I know it's not that big of a deal, but when I saw this, I genuinely just stared at it in disbelief for a few minutes. This is the puzzle? Is the solution literally just bullet time? What does this have to do with literally anything I've done up to this point? Did they run out of ideas? The ancient Zora waterworks were a far better experience despite its minuscule size. Instead of 4 terminals that have you flipping a switch to activate the big switch in the middle, you have multiple clogged pipes that raise the water level when cleaning them out. Each drain you unclog has a direct effect on your surroundings. This interconnected design was far more interesting than the dev test map that they called a temple. They even limited climbing here by making everything wet. You can still circumvent everything with Zonai devices, but it was far closer to what I wanted out of the game. Muktarok didn't have a favorable effect on the temple for me either. The shark phase is perfectly serviceable, but it's really annoying to stun them when they spend so much time on the opposite side of the arena, and they're ridiculously quick if you're stuck using Sidon's water abilities. The Lightning Temple is probably the most traditional feeling dungeon. You still have to reach 4 different terminals down completely separate paths, but the dungeon feels far more claustrophobic and mildly more difficult than what's come before. And look, the fan bike is multi-purpose. It's still a little too simplified for my taste, but I don't hate this one. And Queen Gibdo is just the right balance of terrifying and cartoonish. I really like how the Gibdo hives are used here, forcing you to think on the fly in order to not get overwhelmed. It's also the only time that these enemies are a mild threat with how slow they are. My feelings towards the Construct Factory are complicated. I think it's really cool how you can find this questline organically, and the game lets you do it relatively early. I didn't find it until after the completion of the 4 regions, but I accidentally skipped the entire quest leading up to the mask. Prua told me to try exploring some Zonai ruins, and as a Zelda fan who's really interested in the lore, I knew to finally check out Faron Woods. I took my bike straight to the lowest set of clouds, found a shrine, and a door requiring many hearts to enter. And within is a mysterious mask that led me to a whole new dungeon experience. As amazing as this was, I didn't do this right at all. The expected progression for this quest is really weird in my opinion. The ruins you're supposed to go to are the ones that fell in Kakariko, which I had completely forgotten because this little piss baby refused to let me explore it. Only after Ganondorf reveals his big plan to you can you tell him to fuck off, which is just ridiculous. It doesn't matter if you've seen every memory or pulled the Master Sword, Link has to pretend to be an idiot who couldn't figure out that the Zeldas we see are acting a little suspicious. And then you're supposed to solve the riddle to clear the clouds above Faron and move from island to island until eventually you reach the heart door at the end. So why is the ending the lowest and easiest island to get to? It's just really weird design in my opinion. I guess it worked out for me, but it didn't feel good finding out that I had kneecapped the entire important quest. The Construct Factory itself is the only time the game really tries challenging the player to build something different, so that's already a plus in my book. The temple is all about making different vehicles to get construct parts through a series of challenges, ending with a mostly realized design that you can drive out to the delivery point. Many of the puzzles can still be completely skipped through tried and true strategies such as rewind, but the mechanics on display here are all refreshingly unique. I'd say the same for the boss we fight in the Spirit Temple if it wasn't for the rematch with Master Koga. Something I haven't mentioned yet is how you delve into each dungeon with a companion, which will be your permanent reward upon the dungeon's completion. These stages are actually out on the field with you, with their own AI that can run around and attack for you. It can get a little cluttered, but the idea on its own is really neat, and you can always turn the Ghost of Sages off. Unfortunately, the devs made the horrendous decision to make their powers all tied to the same button, and you have to be near them to activate it. This is such an obvious issue even with just 1 sage, never mind 5. If you want to use a sage's ability, you have to look around for them, pray to Hylia that they don't run away as you approach, and then hope that the correct sage got your input. Trying to use them in general is just frustrating. The only sage I ever keep turned on is Tulin, who's easily the most useful. Him and Yunobo are the only sages with contextual prompts that are automatically enabled when doing certain actions such as gliding, which completely cuts the frustration of stopping everything to activate what you want. Tulin gives you a burst of horizontal speed while gliding, which is always useful for getting where you want to go quickly. Yunobo isn't too bad a sage power either. He can be sent to destroy something at a distance and will always come straight back to you if you're riding a vehicle. It's not very often that one might need to shoot something while driving, and using a weapon is usually faster otherwise, but he still adds something to the experience as a free explosive. They did Sidon dirty, making his abilities as terrible as the dungeon he got stuck with. He provides Link with a single-use free shield, but you lose it as soon as you attack. This attack gains the water element if you want to do some cleanup, but after the Zora questline is done, you'll never need that again. Not to mention opals and the like easily outclassing anything Sidon could do. Circling back to the shield part, there's rarely a good time to activate it. It goes away after a short while, and you can't attack without losing it, so it would only be viable during a really long charge attack from a boss. And you have to remember, you have to hope that you can catch Sidon before the attack comes out. Riju is fine, but struggles to stay relevant in the heat of combat. Like with all the sages, it's very clunky to stop what you're doing and seek them out, and Link is so powerful that you can probably take care of yourself. As soon as our regional phenomena was complete, I never thought it was worth the time to get a single lightning bolt off. Even for Gibdo, it's more convenient to use Link's inventory to take them out. Minoru is probably the most disappointing sage. It's really cool to discover that Tears is really giving you a customizable mech to fight with, but then the size and speed starts to settle in. I didn't even bother taking her on the route to her Sacred Stone this time around, I was that disinterested. Link far outclasses her in agility and combat, and since her Zonai fusions break just as quickly as everything else, there wasn't much of a reason to keep her out. The idea was really cool, I'm just not sure if it got to be fully realized. With the dungeons completed, there's only one thing left to do. It's time to confront the fake Zeldas and take down Ganondorf. Technically, you're probably supposed to go to Hyrule Castle before doing the Construct Factory, but it didn't really fit with the rest of the discussion around dungeons. I don't even know what to classify the quest here as, other than tedious and annoying. All it is go over here, kill some enemies, go over here, kill some enemies, go over here, kill some enemies. I guess they needed to reuse the castle somehow, but this is such a cheap and boring quest. You can't skip any phases either. I tried skipping to the Sanctum, but no, you have to pretend to follow for Ganondorf's plan until he gets bored. Oh look, now we get to go over here, kill some Phantom Ganons, see a phase transition, kill some Phantom Ganons. At least they changed their weapons in the second phase. It's somewhat interesting needing to manage so many mini-bosses at once, and it serves as a nice character moment for how our kindness and friendship can stop the evil of the world. But it's also something I wouldn't regret skipping on subsequent playthroughs. Phantom Ganon himself is reused in the overworld after defeating Gloomhands, and the entire idea of fighting multiple of them is redone in the final fight. Everything that is done well here is done well somewhere else, and those don't have a wild goose chase tacked on. As for the final boss fight, I can't say I wasn't a little disappointed to find out that Ganondorf hadn't moved from the same spot we found him in the beginning. I don't know, I guess I figured if he wasn't going to show his true face in the overworld, he wouldn't be sitting in literally the most obvious place to check. It's not all bad though. I actually really like that it takes place in the deepest part of the depths, where Ganondorf's power has been shown to be the strongest. Everything on the way down is gloomed, chipping away at your hearts if you came unprepared. It's probably not a surprise when I say that I don't care for the battle against Ganon's army, but I do believe it has a solid purpose. Most of the sages are at their best in combat against hordes of enemies, and when there's so many, it doesn't really matter what sage ability you activate. This makes it really easy to chain abilities and nail that feeling of working together to take down a palpable threat. Even when the AI is off doing its own thing, just keeping enemies distracted is perfect for one last fight together. It can also just feel really good cutting through hordes of monsters like they are nothing to really show how far you and Link have come. You know, I have to admit, the Ganondorf fight is actually really cool. He's Link's equal offensively, switching weapons on the fly and even hitting a flurry rush dodge off your own attacks. His demon form only ups the ante even more, and I love the idea of how he's so powerful that even his health bar can't be contained. And he can permanently destroy Link's heart containers? This is when the sages start piling in to join the fight once again. That is, until Ganondorf decides it's time to stop playing around. It's back to a 1v1, and I love how you have to focus on the direction Ganondorf prepares his blade so you can dodge correctly. Of all the bosses in the game, this one challenges the player the most on the intricacies of the combat system, and pulls plenty of unique tricks that you're expected to adapt to. Even if the final phase cuts that short by being piss easy, the pure spectacle of it all easily makes up for it. Riding Zelda high into the sky as the demon dragon pursues is phenomenal, and easily nails the finale the game needed. This is easily the best end the series has ever had in my opinion. But I think the most agreed upon issue in Tears of the Kingdom is the story. I've already mentioned the rare instances of substantial story that happens around the player, so let's dive straight into the memories. When people criticize Breath of the Wild for none of its story happening in the present we played through, Tears doubles down once again. But this time, it's even further back to the founding of Hyrule. Guess I don't need this anymore. Right off the bat, the biggest issue is that they decided to tell a linear story this time around, but non-linearly. This means that you can run into spoilers for the big twist of Sonia dying before you ever even see Sonia die. There is a map if you want to do them all in the correct order, but when the game is designed around seeing a cool thing and going to it, I don't think this was the most thought out. But even if you did do the memories in order, there really isn't anything interesting here. What is the theme? What mistakes did they make to get here? It seems like they were trying to go for Rauru being overconfident, but then learning to put his trust into others after the murder of his wife. It even comes full circle when that pride will be your downfall, Ganondorf. The problem is that this is never really explored. He's not even a part of the scene where his wife is murdered, and he clearly trusted his wife enough to give her a secret stone. He even trusts a stranger claiming to be from the future right away. Also, this is one of the most boring iterations of Ganondorf. He's just evil for the sake of being evil. Sure, Twilight Princess still takes the cake, but there was so much potential here. This is a new era with Ganondorf's rise to power. We know he was taking over sections of the Gerudo Desert, and we know parts of the Gerudo were rebelling, but we never actually get to see any of it. Not even the Gerudo Sage has anything new to say about it. Instead, all we get is Ganondorf mad with power, somehow managing to outmaneuver with a single secret stone 7 fully powered sages also with secret stones. What happened to Raru's big beam of light? Sure, Sonia's dead, but you have so many more sages to help out this time, including having Hylia's blessed Zelda. Lastly, let's cover Zelda. Her story this time around is one of sacrifice. The only way she could live long enough to restore the Master Sword and return it to Link is to lose herself and become an eternal dragon permanently. In one final act, we get to see the moment of no return. She sheds her tears along with her memories, and Link can only watch the events that have already come to pass. This is a really sad moment, and honestly, it's really well done. You even get to see her flying around in the opening moments of the game. Her only title is the Light Dragon, and she stands out as the only dragon not related to the 3 goddesses of Hyrule, or in the last game. It would be a shame if this was somehow undone in the last few minutes of the game without any work or explanation. Oh. What the fuck is Sonia and Rauru doing here? How can they do this after passing on? Why didn't they do this earlier? The crux of Zelda's story is that the process is irreversible. You know, a sacrifice. They're really going to fix everything with a literal wave of their hands? Not a single repercussion to anyone? Not even leaving parts of Zelda that are still draconified? Even Link gets his arm back. What was the point of establishing anything if you're just going to break it? I guess it creates drama, but then you also have to deal with the disappointment of not following through and breaking the trust of your reader. I just wish we at least had to work for it, you know? A side quest to save her would have been nice. Instead, it's just pulled out of their ass for the sake of a cheap happy ending. The moment we grab Zelda's hand, finally making up for our last failure, is really cinematic and would have been really satisfying if it wasn't undercut. As amazing as everything else about the last half hour had been, this lack of consequence honestly ruins the ending for me. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this game since I played it 2 years ago. I really wanted to like this game, and parts of it are genuinely really amazing. Despite all of my gripes, I finished every shrine and I lit every light route in my original playthrough. But I don't look back fondly on it either. Much of it blends together. I didn't really go out of my way for anything more than what I needed footage of this time around. I think I was able to play it for so long just because it was so easy. It's extremely easy to just pick up and knock one more thing off of the checklist. And sometimes you run into something really cool, but that's not what I really come to Zelda for. I like exploring a new world. I like conquering complex dungeons. I like exploring a legendary story. In terms of what I wanted out of an addition to a series I love, Tears of the Kingdom was just disappointing. There are many great ideas here, and it gets some of what I wanted, but I don't think a lot of them reach their full potential. Tears of the Kingdom is not a bad game. A lot of people really like it, and I think that's great, but I can't get over a lot of my issues with it. For as polished as the physics engine is, I can't help but feel many other areas couldn't get the same attention. I can't help but think that this is my least favorite Zelda game that I couldn't put down. Thanks for watching. Here's to the next Zelda title being great for everyone.